Hello everyone and welcome to cap number 6. On the last video we did some battle damage to the Leman Russ and I've painted it gray. I used Sombre Grey from Vallejo Air just to give it a smooth gray finish. So this is kind of like the factory steel and we're going to be painting on top of this and doing some chipping to let this come through. What you're going to need first is a bottle of hairspray. It doesn't really matter what kind, and what we're going to do is we're just going to put 2 light passes over the entire model. I want to stress that you want to make it as light as possible because if you put too much on, the chipping will come out in 2 big chunks and it won't look too good. So give it a light spray and then wait about 15 minutes. And once the hairspray is dry, we're going to use our airbrush to put on a layer of paint. So the one that I've chosen to use is olive green from the Vallejo Mecha color line. And usually I don't thin this down, but you probably want to thin it down with just a drop or 2 of thinner. You want this to be a very light coat, and you're going to do 2 passes over the entire tank. Again, I want to stress, you want to put very light coats on it, or else the chipping won't work properly. And as you can see here, the entire tank is painted, and we're going to give it another 20 minutes to dry, and then we're going to start doing some chipping. So what we're going to do next is we're going to use a brush to kind of chip away at the green that we airbrushed on to reveal the gray underneath. And what you will need is a big brush, something with hard bristles, maybe like a dry brush. You're going to need a cup of water, and what you want to do is you want to dip your brush in the water and then kind of dry it off on a piece of paper towel, and then start feathering away at the edges of your tank. So you want to concentrate on areas that have exposed edges, and wherever else you think we'll see a lot of wear and tear. So what I would recommend is around the hatches, around any kind of moving parts. You can see I already did some on the top of this sponson, but we're gonna do it to the side of the sponson as well. Because if you imagine, like when the cannon is swiveling, it's going to be scraping some paint off. Basically what you're doing here is you're using the water on your brush to reactivate the hairspray that we put on underneath. So the water is going to soak through the top layer of green. It's going to dissolve the hairspray, and then it's going to take all of that paint off with it. Now you want to be careful that you let this dry before you start chipping at it, or else you're going to start taking away chunks that are way too big. Once you're happy with the amount of chipping that you've put on your tent, let it dry and then give it a spray with matte varnish. I'm doing it with the airbrush, but you can do a rattle can as well. We're doing this because we wouldn't want to chip more of the paint accidentally when we're rubbing it or get some moisture on, so make sure you give it a nice. Once you're happy with the amount of chipping that you've done to your model, it's time to put some more color on it. So for this one, I guess we're pretty lucky. The Leman Russ doesn't have a lot of extra colors on it. I am going to be painting kind of a flag on the front of the tank. If you go look at a Mark I British tank from World War II, they have that was it white, red, white right at the front track. I'm going to be doing that, but I'm going to do it in reverse. So I'm going to do red, white, red. So using just some masking tape, we're going to tape off the areas that we don't want to get paint on, and because there's more red, I'm going to start with the red. And for this one I used a thinned down Mephiston Red. I usually use an air paint, but I really like Mephiston Red. It's got really nice rich pigments, so I thinned this down. I think 2 parts paint, 1 part thinner, and then we're just going to give it a pass or 2 with the airbrush, and then after that we're going to switch to white gray from Mecha color from Vallejo, and we're going to cover up the parts of the red just to leave a white stripe in the middle, and we're going to paint that as well. Once I take off the tape here, you can see that the red and white really added some good touches to the tank. Don't worry if the paint overflowed a little bit. You can always go back with a brush and just tighten up those lines there. It looks good, but it now looks too clean. So not to worry, we're going to take a dry brush. We're going to go back with the olive green and the somber gray, and we're just going to dab away a little bit at the raised edges, do a little bit of dry brushing, and try to mimic the chipping that we did on the rest of the vehicle. Next, we're going to move on to the tracks of the tank. So this one I want it to be a dark color just to contrast the kind of light green and light gray that's covering the rest of the tank. When I'm doing a realistic kind of paint scheme like this, I almost never use pure black. So to get this dark gray, what I did was I mixed black and somber gray from Vallejo Air. So about 3 parts black to 1 part gray, get it a good mixture, and then you can just paint all over the treads. And while we're at it, we're going to paint the same color on the the bolt guns, the storm bolt, not the storm bolter, the heavy bolters, 3 of them sticking out of the hull there. And then once those are dry, we're gonna give it a little bit of a light dry brush using the Sombre Grey just to bring out the edges. The last feature on the hull of the tank is the exhaust pipes. So for the casing of the exhaust, I'm gonna go use that same mixture of black and Sombre Grey all over the exhaust. And then for the piping itself, this one, I don't like using metallics because we're kind of using, what do you call it, like a realistic painting technique, so I want to avoid metallics whenever possible. I'm going to be using the earth paint from Vallejo Game Air, and it's going to give us a really good basis for when we do pigments and kind of rust effects on top of that later on. With the main parts of the tank done, we're going to move on to painting those explosions and battle damage that we did in the previous video. So for this, I went back to the airbrush. I used a pure black from Vallejo Air. You can use black primer, any black will do. And you want to turn the PSI of your compressor down to about 25 to 30. And we're just going to carefully spray it onto the parts that are damaged. So the big las cannon glancing blows that we did earlier, we're going to paint around those areas. We're also going to carefully put it into those little bolter holes that we drilled. If it looks too neat, you can just take a dry brush with some of the black paint that you used and just smudge it up a little bit, make it look rough, make it look messy. By now the tank's looking pretty good. And at this point, you can do kind of 1 or 2 things when you come to doing some shading on the tank. You can either do a pin wash, which means using a small brush to put shading paint around each of the rivets, or you can do what I can do here is to do a unifying wash. And for this, I'm going to be using AK Interactive's enamel weathering paints. If you guys want more info on that, check out cap number 3. I did a more in-depth tutorial on that. But suffice to say, what we're going to do is we're going to take the streaking grime, we're going to thin it down with the Odorless Thinner from AK. We're going to do this 1 part streaking grime and 3 parts mineral spirits. And with a large brush, we're just going to lightly kind of brush it all over the vehicle. And this is going to do one of 2 things. One, it's going to tie all the colors together, make it look like they've all been through the same environment. And the other thing it's going to do is it's going to leave these little rust deposits in the cracks and stuff like that. It's very light, it's very subtle, but it's going to save us a lot of time and effort when it comes to doing the weathering later on. Once you've given the enamel paint about a half hour to dry, we're going to go back with a matte varnish. I'm going to spray it 1 more time. Again, just want to make sure that we don't smudge it accidentally later on. Moving on to the turret, I did the armor in much the same way that we did the rest of the hull. The only part that is giving me a little bit of trouble was the actual gun itself. So, like, unlike most of the other guard cannons, this one is like a minigun. So I would imagine it's a polished metal barrel. I tried to stay away from metallics, but I think in this one case we're gonna use some silver. So what I did was I mixed what is it? Sorry, one sec. Mecha Color Light Steel. I did this 3 parts of the light steel with 1 part Sombre Grey, and then I sprayed it all over the barrel of the minigun with an airbrush. For the shading of the main gun, I kind of wanted to keep it relatively clean. I mean, if they're going to take care of 1 part of the tank, they're going to do it to the main gun. So I wanted to stay away from the rust and the grime that we've been using so far. So what I settled on doing was a 2-stage wash. The first one I did was with AK Interactive's, what's this called? Blue for Panzer Gray filter. Okay, so this is a paint that's good for unifying different parts of a model together. Thin this down 1-to-1 with mineral spirits, give it a light pass, and then we're going to do the same thing again with brown blue for Panzer Gray vehicles. Wow, that's a mouthful. But yeah, it's a nice wash with a little bit of blue and green tones to it, and we're going to thin it down and cover the rest of the barrel with it. And the last thing that we're going to do is we're going to do a kind of a heated effect on the end of the gun. So I wanted to kind of look like it's been firing and the metal's kind of heating up. So for this, I'm going to take Vallejo Black, put it through the airbrush, and from about, I would say, 10 inches away from the vehicle, I'm going to lightly feather it on the front end of the barrel. And I'm going to only go about halfway up, and I'm going to keep it very light. So what you want to do is still be able to see the steel showing through underneath the black. And once the black is dry, we're going to do the same. But this time we're going to use red terracotta from Game Air, and we're going to put it on the first quarter of the barrel. So just like the black, you want to put it on very, very lightly, and you still want to see the black and the silver slightly showing through underneath it. And once that is dry, I kind of want to add a blue glaze effect to it. So I don't have a blue glaze paint with me. So what I ended up doing was I used contrast. So I did Talassar Blue. So Talassar Blue mixed half and half with contrast medium, and I sprayed it through the airbrush just kind of all over the barrel of the gun. I did it very lightly, and you can probably pick up that there's a little bit of blue tone in it. And that's where I'm going to wrap up this video. I ended up painting the commander as well, but I don't think he's really relevant to what I'm trying to show in this tutorial. If you guys want, I might do a tutorial on him or other guard infantry later down the line. I'm going to do some close-up shots so you can see exactly what I did throughout this video. You can see that even though we put all these layers on it, you can still see the gray chipping, you can still see the little pools of rust, you can still see the battle damage, and overall it looks pretty good. So at this point, I'm pretty happy with the model. I'd say it's 80%, 90% done, but we're going to go even further with this. So on part 3 of this video, we are going to be going in with a variety of weathering tools like pens and pigment and stuff like that, and we're going to make it look like this thing has been tracking through the mud for weeks and weeks, and it's going to look much more realistic. So until then, thank you for watching. Once again, I want to thank all of our sponsors on Patreon. If you guys want to see the paints that I used, I'll include a list and some links below. And yeah, that's about it. And oh, one more thing. If you guys like the AK paints that I used here, because I sure did, you can use the coupon code AK-paint at checkout on our website, and you'll get 20% off of all of our AK products. So yeah, go check that out, and thank you guys, and we'll see you on the next episode.